Laughing time is over, yes, the worn quote. Why don't we give it a minute or two? We have time. I think we're gonna have to hold it because this does not, this microphone does not fit in there. So while we are waiting another minute, please do make sure you log in with a big QR code thingy up there or your laptop, one of the two, so we get accurate counts of who's in the room. It's important to get a big room. So while we get started, I'm Wes Hardiger, and I will turn it over to Joey here in a minute. Today's graphic, every time I have these queued up graphics and I keep finding better stuff, and I have to thank Michael Richardson for actually finding this. He actually saw this sticker on somebody's laptop and actually sent me a picture of it. And I assume you found like the actual source image on Amazon or something? Yeah, so this is today's graphic is sponsored by Michael Richardson.
All right, so let's get this party started. So, hi everybody, welcome to this IETF session of dance. We are your chairs, Wes and Joey. Um, a reminder for the people, the new arrivals, to scan the QR code to make sure that you are signed in the blue sheets. Next slide, please. All right. So let's begin by mentioning the note wheel, which I'm sure most of you are already pretty familiar with, either with at this IETF meeting or at the previous ones. Um, this is to highlight for you guys to remember that there could be some legal repercussions, right? Or some legal implications to some actions here, right? To keep that in mind, right, Wes? Next slide, please. And then the second part of the note wheel is to highlight some important BCPs, like BCP 54, that includes the code of conduct, which is mentioned in the next slide. All right, so the most important thing here is to continue treating everybody with respect. This group has constantly been quite respectful, right? So let's keep that going. Let's try to speak slowly and clearly, remembering that not everybody is an English native speaker, right? So on that note, then also um, uh, let's not be afraid to ask somebody to repeat themselves or ask slower or speak more clearly. All right. Similar reasoning for whenever we are discussing stuff, right? And well, a couple more notes up there. Next slide, please. Yep. So here we have some dance information, right? Pointing to the data tracker, the mailing list. Hopefully you've all already subscribed to it. And also hopefully you all survive the mailing list discussions. And yeah, hopefully you've also read at least the abstracts of the three drafts that the working group is currently dealing with. Next slide, please. So another reminder that this session is being recorded, and very, very important for everybody to remember to wear your masks unless you're actively at the mic, right? And then in that case, it will be optional. So here, just a couple of notes for both in-person and remote participants. And I think we can proceed to the next slide. All right. So this is for the agenda. And I don't know, first, Wes, did I miss anything in the previous slides? No? All right.
All right, so Thank you, first off, for the note takers, Jim Fenton and Tim Wazinski, who have both offered to take notes. I'm sure that they would appreciate help. In fact, I know that they would. The note-taking application is a little pencil icon in the agenda, and the more people that help, the easier it is for everybody. So we're going to start off with the sort of the current document status, and then talk about working group activity level discussions a little bit, as we always do. And then the two presentations we have today are sort of, one is about the architecture and the other is about sort of some dance use cases. We'll have an open mic for anybody that wants to discuss other things. And then if you guys don't use it all of the time, the scary chairs are going to introduce a topic because you guys didn't give us enough agenda material. So what's our current document status? We have 3 documents. One is the IETF dance architecture. And then the 2 other are the TLS Dane client ID and the Dane client ID certificate. The last 2 we have just put into last call yesterday. So awesome that we have actually progressed to the last call stage in 2 of the documents. These came in the door to dance, pretty well established, and it was time to kick them in. So we set a 3-week last call, and Joey and I did it, I want to say 2 days ago. So it puts the 3-week expiration on November 29th. So please do read, comment. Most importantly, indicate whether there are changes needed, and even if you see nothing wrong, please indicate on the mailing list that you are happy with the documents and they are ready to progress and you support them. We need active counts of who has read it. The mailing list activity is still generally, pretty slow. There was actually a fair amount in September, but only 3 in October, and they were announcement-related stuff, not actually active discussion, and 0 in August, but everybody takes vacation in August. So we still wonder, maybe there's just not that much to do, but we have so many interesting use cases. We'd love to see them discussed more. So with that, we're going to turn it over I guess we agreed, you were going to go first, right? Okay, with the architecture document. So let me load your slides, and you're welcome to come up.
Okay, next. So I'm Ole Johansson. I got dragged into this by Ash, who started it all, by not keeping my mouth shut, and now I'm standing here. We can take the next slide. We're going through the documents. The way I see us sorting out the documents, because I have a big problem with the current architecture document, is to have one document that covers the general idea of dancing, right? An architecture document. And then we have documents now about secure dancing, meaning the TLS changes. And I would like to see how to dance document. That is, if I have my own protocol, how would I implement dance? How would I write a document? What are the requirements for applying dance to all kinds of protocols? Then we have dancing with Wes or Joey or something else that is protocol specific. Currently, the architecture document has a little bit of everything. I think Ash has just collected all kinds of information in a rather unstructured way, and I would very much like to organize up that. So this is how I see us sorting out, at least the architecture document that I'm struggling with. Next. So it's a mess. It's a mixture of a lot of things, and I can definitely go in and cut out a lot of stuff, but then I need some responses. I can do pull request or something, so I need someone to step forward saying, yeah, let's do that. We have one pull request now that will add a lot of information on LoRaWAN. I would like that to be a separate document on how to dance with LoRaWAN, and maybe have just a small use case mentioned in the architecture document. Yeah, we have someone in the queue.
Rick, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rick van Rijn. I'm a modern dancer, but also I was with this group when it was founded. Lost track of it, I'm afraid. What we discussed in the beginning is it would be really attractive to have users, just people behind browsers or behind a mail tool, to also be able to use something like TLS and authenticate towards an endpoint. I didn't find it back in the architecture. Would such an extension be welcomed? Is that the sort of thing you're asking about?
Sorry, think once again.
The dance standards speak predominantly about devices that register as clients. It doesn't speak of end users, people sitting behind desks. And that is the sort of thing we discussed in the beginning.
I have a slide coming up on that.
Okay. In this direction, we've done a lot of architecture work, and we might be able to help demess or upmess the spec.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically how I entered into this, because I've been spending too many years in SIP. And in SIP, we have user-related things, and I think this could be beneficial for SIP. But we need to have some concern there as well. So that was my starting point in this. So, yes, okay, we have a candidate to help me. Next slide, please. I've seen in the documents we have that all of them refer to a very flat namespace. And I talked with some of the DNS gurus that I regularly meet for various reasons, from fish and chips to real DNS discussions. And they say that, well, you really want to consider that. If you're going to have a lot of entries, you may not need a flat namespace. You need a tree of some kind, like enum or PTRs, for DNS to be able to manage this properly. For me, this is how to dance, a requirements document for setting up various records types. And so, next. And if we, like Rick mentioned, put users into dancing, then we really need to consider how we can protect the privacy of these. I've checked around and talked with people, and there are a couple of documents describing ways to handle this by putting hashes into DNS instead of saying OAG at Edwina.net or something like that. And this could also be mentioned in the requirements document on protocol implementation. Next.
Rick is back in the queue. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry. Thanks.
Yeah, don't know if it's okay to interrupt. Rick van Rijn, modern dancer. One other way, typical of TLSA records, will be to have a root certificate authority that's representing the client.
Yep. Cool, let's discuss that. Brendan.
Hello, I just want to know if you have seen RFC 6920, naming things with hashes.
Oh,
it
that's
specifies
a good reference.
URIs containing hash extensions.
Great. I think this is just experimental or informational, so.
Okay. Sure, just seems relevant. RFC 6920.
6920. I'll get that from the notes. Thank you. Next. Or did we have?
Go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not too fast more. Just a check on the previous comment. I'm actually the author of this RFC. There is some subtlety there, because with SMTP on the email level, there's issues where Paul with a capital P is a different endpoint than Paul with a lowercase p, and in DNS you have no case sensitivity. So there are some more complications if you're doing anything with users mapping to DNS.
Great. We have a lot of input for writing that properly. Thank you. So now I'm stepping on Shimon's toes a little bit here, but I prepared him for that. The client cert document we could take into a implementation requirement document, but since we're entering last call, we may have to reconsider that. It was just an idea. We need to find candidates, people that can help us write protocol-specific documents, so we at least get a few up on the table early, so we can test our ideas and focus on where we have energy in the group, not just all the ideas that was in the original architecture document. We need at least one for the underscore service and one for underscore device, one document each. One example, if we still want them both, and maybe discuss if we want some other tags. I'm kind of hesitant for underscore service because it kind of syntactically is very close to the tags used for SRV records, and it's only half the tag for SRV, we have service and protocol. And right now, the document refers to that registry, but only use half of it. And we need to figure out if there are other patterns we can use, not only email addresses or device IDs or so, how to code an identity into a DNS name. But as Wes said, we need energy, so maybe we should try to get more practical, closer to the real application problem. We do need a TLS extension, so Schumann, a big thank you for promoting that and moving that forward. But now we need to start looking into the rest. Next. I know that there was some code somewhere at some point. I lost track of it. But do we need to prepare some cool stuff happening, maybe a hackathon next to IETF, and look into some libraries like, I mean, this won't get anywhere unless OpenSSL and the libraries people use have it. So curl, OpenSSL, some server, some co-op libraries, something. Need to figure out how this works and how big changes we need to do to the existing platforms. Okay. Yeah, I think that was.
Any questions? That is the last slide. Yeah. Any discussion on the architecture document? Originally in the charter, during the BOF, we agreed that the architecture document would be part of the deliverables, but we knew that the other ones were sort of, much more done. But this really describes the use cases that most people had a hard time wrapping their head around by just reading the protocol documents. So hence this is an important one. Jim?
Hi, Jim Fenton. As I was reading through the architecture document, I got to this section on use cases and I thought, oh great, this is going to describe the problem that we're solving. And it seems to just jump right into details without describing the problem. So I'd like to suggest that some use case information, the problem statement there be included somewhere.
Yep. I mean, those details is the stuff I want to move to the other documents I'm proposing to make the architecture more an architecture overview. Shimon?
Hi, this is Shimon. So I think I'm going next. So I have a bunch of comments on your slides. So should I do it up front? Because I'd like to walk through the slides later. That might be easier. Okay.
You're cool. Okay.
Michael Richardson. So one of the things I quickly noticed today was that our other documents don't actually reference the architecture document. That might be intentional so that they don't get caught in that. But I suspect it should be a normative reference. But that's a decision to make about what we're doing.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that. I don't remember the intended status of the architecture document, but there's a good question of whether it'd be proposed or informational. And I think I could make arguments either way, so I will let the working group decide what to do. But is there something in the architecture document that should be normatively referenced? Like you cannot do or implement the other protocol pieces without it.
Without having read it. Having read it, that's the point. It's, so we may not have protocol content, but generally they're informative, not proposed. And so referencing them non-normatively is okay. So just something we should think about before we get too far, for the simple reason that if we suddenly change things, then we're going to change our timing and our process for these documents. So I think that's an important part.
So that's a good point. So can I ask you a favor and on the mailing list, respond with the last call comments about.
I'm going to say exactly that. Yeah. So, but I thought it should be useful to do that as well. The other thing that I wonder about, and based upon my understanding of where we're going, is that one of the things that, this is totally unrelated, sorry, second comment. One of the scenarios that we imagined is that a manufacturer creates device, populates it with certificate, which they populate into manufacturer's DNS zone. and device says I am device 4378, blah, 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 blah. And that gets us out of a lot of our issues. Okay, so that's a kind of well-established pattern. The question is, are there scenarios where owner-operator of device actually wants to own that zone? And I think that it doesn't matter from the other end's point of view, from what it is. But if if it is a scenario that we want to support, then we probably need to decide somehow it goes somewhere. And I'm actually not sure that it's not another document, or I'm not even sure it requires any text. But it is a different pattern of who trusts who. And it also matters who you're talking to. And there was a bunch of comments about, browsers and this kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to get a browser with a ID in google.com if it's Chrome, right? So I'm pretty sure that the browser use case, if someone has that the DNS identity that I assert as a client is going to be in my zone or in some friendly zone. So that's a case of that I think that if that's a space we want to go into, that it immediately invokes that other piece of space.
I think the important thing to remember from a dance work item point of view is in order to support these use cases, and I think all of your use cases are wonderfully valid and should go into the architecture document as possibilities, what use cases require changes or additions to the DNS or the DNS protocol itself, or the TLS protocol?
So the interesting thing is that I don't think there's any on the wire changes. No. I think it's conceptual changes and as to what's going on. And so I think it's more subtle. That's why I think it's difficult to decide whether what we need to say, because in some ways there's nothing to say, right? It just works. It should just work. But somebody says, well, but hang on here. What's the relationship that I have, or what are the other things? And I think we're going to get security review feedback on that question. And so either we say as little as possible, or we wind up having to say a lot.
Well,
right?
It kind of borders the BCP, but your question is basically, I mean, if I have a device ID and the manufacturer creates an entry and I want to take over that, if I create an entry, should it be in my zone or should that be in his zone? We need to figure out what we want.
Right.
And do we allow two concurrent entries in different DNS zones for the same device?
I don't think we can even we can even control it, right?
No, not at all.
In particular, I could go and copy your entries out of your zone and put them in my zone without your knowledge. And that may be meaningless, but I could do it.
Transferring ownership from the manufacturer seems very complex, but at least we should mention it. Absolutely.
Well, we have a couple protocols for doing that, and that's where I'm actually coming from. Yeah. Thank you.
So Joey just pointed out this is a great discussion for the mailing list that doesn't have enough traffic on it. So Michael, let's start a thread, please. And Ben?
Hi, I want to support what Michael was saying. If we don't have a clear solution to this problem, dance risks creating an enormous amount of e-waste and generally making the sort of obsolescence and lock-in problems of IoT worse, because it creates an authentication paradigm where the device can only authenticate to anything if the manufacturer's zone is still live, basically. And if the manufacturer goes out of business or drops this product line, then the device is bricked. So I really think we should not end up in that situation. And I do think that there is some actual protocol level work to talk about there. For example, being able to ask the device in a standard way, what is your TLSA, and potentially, for example, defining a profile that really says you use the Dane EE mode because the other modes are not as portable.
Okay, I think that's a good point too. I mean, the TLS extension covers that a little bit too. Again, having these discussions on the mailing list would be absolutely fantastic. And I think I think one of the takeaways that I heard from this conversation personally is there may be elements of the architecture document that might actually pull into some of the protocol documents to make sure that the protocol document is standalone enough. So especially, I hope you might have guidance with that of what pieces might be injectable into the other ones if we feel that the last call is not a readable document on its own. That's an important distinction.
I would personally like to focus on the architecture document and getting that into shape by throwing out bits and pieces and leave the leftovers somewhere else in the GitHub repo. And then we'll start working with the bits and pieces. But trying to get an architecture document that is easy to read and get an overview of the protocol, like we said earlier, the solution.
And I don't quite remember, but was the GitHub repo listed in the additional resources for this draft? Because if it's not, then it would be very, very good to put it there.
Yeah, I mean, we have a GitHub repo for the architecture document. Still have to force Shimon to bring his documents into the same GitHub repo. And so we have everything in there, but feel free to go in there and do pull request and help us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shimon, you don't have slides, right? That's my recollection.
Yeah, I don't have slides. Am I ready to go?
Yep, you go.
Okay. Although I may refer to all those slides if you don't mind, so you may want to put those back. So before I start, I just wanted to, before I forget, I wanted to quickly mention all those questions about implementations. AFNIC, the French registry, actually has one. So I think, Sandosh, if you're here, you are. He may want to mention that when he speaks later on. So I just want to put in a plug for that. On all those points, so the architecture document, I agree, it's a little bit unstructured. In my view, it was intended generally to be a general framework to describe how things use dance, not about specific application use cases, but over time what happened was people, to kind of describe how the things work, they had to describe applications, so that's why IoT came in and various other things. And I think one of the challenges is the application architecture for IoT may be significantly different from something else like SMTP transport security or SIP, for example. So that makes it a little bit challenging. So we should take that into consideration if we want to, as you suggested, have a separate architecture document and a use cases document. So we need to figure out how those two would work in concert. So that is my comment about that. On Ole's assertion that most of our docs document a flat namespace, I don't actually think I agree with that. The record name format specifically defines a structure that is very amenable to hierarchical structure, right? So I would like Ole to read the document and tell me if you disagree, and I can explain to you why that is. We can elaborate and I can show you examples. Maybe the couple of examples that we gave show something that looks like a non-hierarchical namespace, but it's perfectly amenable to supporting that. And both the examples, both the server-specific identity and the device-specific identity, those are the two examples that we put in.
Shimon, can I insert myself in the queue and then take myself out and then ask you the question, which is, I don't remember if any of the current documents really discuss handling transfer of ownership. So when a device moves from one manufacturer to be owned by an institution that wants to overtake the client authentication.
Yeah, they don't, right? So that's a good thing. So that would be an IoT architecture specific discussion. That doesn't belong in the two protocol documents I wrote, but it belongs somewhere, I think, right? So that's a very good point. As far as the email-like record name formats, I think, Ole, I suspect where you're coming from is the SIP user case, which uses those types of identities. So again, the draft, if you read the draft carefully, it's not prescriptive about the record name format. So it shows two examples. None of them hashes any component of the client identity because the two examples were a service specific identity and a device identity. Presumably those are not as privacy sensitive. So if a Dane client application were using email-like identities or SIP user agents, I think it would be perfectly appropriate for them to use the, what about the truncated hash format that you have in your document. And smime cert is the other one that uses that format, I think, right? So if it helps to include an example of such a record name, then we can do that. I have no objection to doing that.
Sorry, Paula, just you're referring to the OpenPHP hashing mechanism.
Yeah.
That's not a privacy mechanism. That's just a normalization. So you shouldn't be using that as a security, as a masking or hiding identity property. Yeah. It's definitely not meant for that.
Okay, fair enough.
There's no security properties defined for that.
Right? Okay, yeah, so that's an open question then. If you're using applications that have privacy sensitive client identities, should you be using this protocol at all, right? So that's another question. I'm not going to answer that now. If people want to weigh in on that, please do so. Are you in the queue?
Yeah. Rick van Rijn.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be helpful to have an example for a client at user at domain name example.
Okay.
Personally, I would also be interested to have something that's not for a specific service like IMAP, but also to have something that just says, in general, I use all sorts of protocols, and this is the identity I'm using, and this is the Dane record that specifies it. I do not care or do not feel that it's in line with my privacy to publish what sort of protocols I'm using. So maybe something with a wildcard that might do that.
Sure, yeah. So wildcards and Dane TA is one way to solve that, right? So you
I feel really careful because wildcards are really difficult. But
Yep, sure. So yeah, I guess the question is that discussion, does that belong in the protocol document or some application architecture document? We have to figure that out, right? All right, so let me. Okay, so your other comment about the service-specific identity only including 1/2 of an SRV record, that's true. That was deliberate because we thought it probably won't be the case that a client would have distinct security credentials for distinct transport protocols, UDP or TCP, right? So if you want to make a case that they should, and then we should design a record name format that accommodates that, we can discuss that. It's just I didn't think there was a need to do that. Okay, so I think that's the bulk of my comments. Back to you, Ole, and feel free to engage us on suggested changes to the core protocol documents. They're on last call, but we can take additional feedback and adapt them as needed.
All right, and Victor is in the queue.
Oh, yeah, Victor.
Victor, go ahead.
Hear me?
In the last meeting, the topic came up of having yet another TLS extension that asks servers to solicit a client certificate. I haven't had a chance to progress that. Is there still need or interest in seeing that move forward?
Very good question, Victor. Yeah, I think you anticipated something I was about to say. So Michael Richardson and I just had a chat about this prior to this meeting, and we were intending to put out a draft. So this is the TLS extension to explicitly solicit a certificate request message from the server. Is that right?
Yes.
I was
That's
making sure Victor agreed, but yes, we are planning to write that. I think there's several people who have come up with use cases for that. We do intend to do that. I was going to make an attempt to put it out before IETF 115. I failed. But we will do it. The question is, that extension is more general in nature than dance. So should it go to the TLS working group, or where should that work be done? So there is an open question about that.
That is an excellent question. I think the dance chairs will have to
Last
consult
time it
with.
was
I would get the document
suggested that the TLS
out, and I would get the document out, and then we can negotiate between the dance chairs and the TLS chairs where the best place for it to actually be published is. So
Okay.
write it as a personal document for now, and then
sure, yeah. Okay, great. That sounds good to me.
It's hard to talk about a document that's not written.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's all I had. Oh, there's one last topic. So the other thing that's come up a few times is the suggestion about doing Dane client authentication another way, such as moving the authentication to the application layer using TLS exported authenticators and channel binding. I didn't see any appetite for proposing such a mechanism, but if anyone wants to do that, there's an open question there, right? But I don't think we're planning to do that right now. Putting it in the TLS stack. Go ahead. So this is so that right now the peer authentication happens in the TLS layer, right? So there's a mechanism called TLS exported authenticators where you can do it at the application layer and then communicate the results back and bind it to the TLS channel underneath, right? So that makes it, there's a set of use cases. I can't remember all of them, but if you want to do things like, you know, authenticate with a different certificate later rather than a different identity later in the TLS stream or a variety of other things, you can do that, right? So the problem I think this poses for dance clients is that each application has to complicate their infrastructure by implementing this authentication at the app layer rather than just punting it to the TLS layer, right? It's easier for applications. There may be some benefits and security advantages to the application layer authentication architecture, but I don't see anyone jumping up and proposing to do it that way. Right?
So Victor, you have an open mic, but not a queue. There we go. Go ahead.
Right. On that topic, you know, if we were to attempt to authenticate, let's say, email users to their submission service, then indeed an application layer authentication makes a bit more sense, and then one would want such a mechanism to ultimately be a SASL mechanism, leveraging TLS's export capabilities and so on. So we would design a new SASL mechanism that incorporates Dane. On the other hand, if we're talking MTA to MTA, then the current kind of in TLS, like client auth, makes more sense.
Yep, thanks. I think that's all I had. All right.
Sorry, a bit late. Rick van Rijn, I'm still figuring out what you mean exactly, but when it hits upon authentication and extracting either identities or keying material, I'm very eager to look at that and at least not say no at this point.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's have a chat about it later, and then we can discuss. Thanks.
Maybe also talking a bit more about it in the mailing list, Shimon? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Santosh, and today this is one of the use cases for the dance working group. So LoRaWAN is a long-range wide area network. It is a IoT technology that comes under the LPWAN range. LPWAN is low power wide area network. So here we are using the technology as very low bandwidth. Next slide, please. So LoRaWAN also has the usual challenges like in other IoT technologies where the key needs to be shared with different stakeholders. So these are the root keys for the device. which needs to be shared with different stakeholders who will be operating at the IP end. So that is a problem, and that is a problem for most of the IoT technologies. So next slide, please. So this is the architecture for LoRaWAN. It's a star topology where we have the end device, and the end device is connected to the radio gateway via the LoRa technology. And after that, in the internet side, we have different stakeholders, different servers, sorry. The NS is the network server, JS is the joint server, and the AS is the application server. So there are cases, these different servers can be operated or managed by same stakeholders, or could be operated or managed by different stakeholders. So what happens is that there are two keys here, root keys here. One is the network key and the application key. So the network key and the application key is with the device during the manufacturing stage. And after that, those two keys are AES 128-bit symmetric keys, has to be shared with the stakeholders in the internet side. Either the network server needs to have the network key, the application server needs to have the application app root key. So, so this enables, so the prior sharing is needed to enable the IoT device onboarding. So for communication, the communication between the end device and the network server is encrypted via the session keys generated by this network root key. And the communication between the end device and the application server is encrypted by the session keys generated by the app key. So that is for end-to-end. But for this to be done, we have the JS, which is the joint server. It acts as the AA server, authentication and authorization server. So the network server and the AS, application server, needs to communicate with the JS. So for this, they need to do mutual authentication. And as per the LoRaWAN specifications, how the network server, for example, the network server and the joint server mutually authenticate each other is not normative. So it is up to the implementer's point of view, how they do that. So what we try to do is that we wanted to do with the web PKI. When we do with the web PKI and the certificate authority model, we found out certain issues. For example, from a cost point of view, LoRa is like €1 per year. And if we need to buy a certificate for doing this mutual authentication, then that is an issue. Another issue is that the protocol stack that this network server or the application server uses, they don't have the CA bundle as in the case of the web browsers. So also we were not able to use certificates like Let's Encrypt, because here the identification is hierarchical, and it's like a MAC ID which has 16 digits, and it is possible that there is a point between these 16 digits, and so Let's Encrypt couldn't do it more than 8 labels. So these are the different issues that we found out. So the solution was that using self-signed certificates. But when we use self-signed certificates, what happens is that there is a requirement for all the servers in this ecosystem needs to get from one root CA, and that is an issue. So next slide, please. So DANE comes, this dance architecture and the DANE client ID and DANE certificate authorization drafts comes as a solution for this issue where we need not have a single root CA. We can have federated CAs, and each of these ecosystem or the servers could create self-signed certificates, but could authenticate between the servers in the different ecosystem based upon DANE client or identity. So we had an implementation, and this implementation has been presented during the IETF115, and my colleague here, Gael, he has implemented that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry. So I'm not going into the details of this because these have already been implemented. So my colleague here, he took the Go library of DANE TLS authentication that is done by Shumon, and he developed it, and he implemented both the client ID and the client certificate draft. So these are the details of what has been done. So we were able to test with different servers which had root CAs from different certificate authorities of self-sign certificates, and were able to mutually authenticate each other. So that's why we are here, because it proves that the dance working group documents or the work enables mutual authentication with the federated CAs. And IETF115, next slide, please. We were, sorry, yeah. This is not actually client-side authentication, but because from the end device point of view, the server needs to be authenticated. So my colleague here implemented that also. He tried to send the DNS authentication chain from the server side to the device, even though the network is very constrained. We fragmented the complete chain so that the device can authenticate the server, but I think this is not part of the dance charter yet. So that's it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you for the excellent use case. Is anybody have questions about it? I see people leaning but not standing. Okay, I think that's good. Joey, we have 15 minutes left. Do you think the dance working group is ready for the talk?
I think it's time to get scary.
Is there a reload button?
I hope that sounded ominous.
No, is there a way to force Meet Echo to reload slot? Where is the reload button? Thank you. It did not reload the right list. It's not ready to be shared. Well, I can do it through screen sharing too, is the other option. So I will do that. Yeah, I'll do it with screen sharing. Too scary, yes. So we need to discuss something about how protocols are made. And they go through many changes. You may have noticed that we're changing a little bit as we move toward last call, and things are developing and changes are happening. See, first off, protocol start is just this fledgling of specification, and they're not able to dance yet. They haven't actually done much in life. They're brand new. And so first they must learn to interoperate and play nicely together. And they get together and they play and they learn how to behave and be nice. I found a bunch of pictures of not nice that I did not put on this slide, but it was tempting. Eventually, specifications decide what they want to be when they grow up, and They really mature, and that's what last call is all about, right? We push these specifications to the point where they know what they're going to do in life. This is what we hope. This is what we aim for. When I searched for work, by the way, I just have to call this out. The one on the left, the miner came up, and I thought, well, Bitcoin miner, that's, like, it's perfect. That's a protocol. Sorry. But to reach adulthood, it requires testing. It requires compatibility. It requires making sure that things work well together. And that is critical. So we scary chairs have a few questions. Even if you answered some of these questions before, in fact, we've just heard a couple in the presentations, I encourage you to answer them again. But I'm looking for commitments. I'm looking for who's actually done something. I'm actually feeling like I'm running my second BOF for the day because I just ran one last session. And now I have some questions. They're going to sound very BOF-like. So in the beginning, we need implementations. So I actually have, questions of who's been working on implementations on the client side, on the server side. Are there any obstacles? We've had some stuff at the hackathon. So hold that. Thank you. So one of the first questions is, I am planning on implementing Dane technologies, right? You're an implementer. I'm going to put it into the counting queue because I'm curious how many people out there are actually going to actively work on this. If you do not raise your hand, that means that you are intentionally prohibiting and going to get in the way of somebody implementing. So just don't use the do not raise hand button. It doesn't make sense. That is true. Christopher, go ahead and talk if you're raising your hand that way. Otherwise, you're clicking the wrong raise hand button. This is not my first BOF today. I'm experienced, and I know why people did that. All right, so excellent. So that actually shows 11 people that are, actively working on deploying or implementing, I should say, dance technologies. I think that's very good. Although there's 8 people that are going to get in your way, so I watch out for them. But... Okay, great. Is there anybody that wants to speak to the challenges of, oops, did I just make the slides go? I did. Anybody that wants to speak to the challenges of anything you encountered that wasn't surmountable? No, okay. Oh, Shuman?
Well, I'm not directly answering your question, but I was just reminded that I think Robert Moskowitz dropped in some questions earlier today about Dane, and about dance, and did we address them? I think one of them was he wanted to ask whether we should define a new Dane usage mode, and Michael already answered, and I think I agree with him. I don't see any need. It's probably going to be Dane EE or Dane TA. So unless there's a compelling rationale for new semantics associated with the Dane usage mode, I don't think we need one.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I had the same brain thinking, wow, I hadn't thought of that. But I didn't come up with
but I
that
just wanted to ask aloud to see if anyone else had any contrary thoughts. And the second question was a little bit more interesting. He asked whether we need to define a new Dane selector for CBOR encoded certificates. And that one, I'm not sure I have an opinion on, but I'd like to see if anyone else does. So right now, if I recall, the Dane spec has 2 selectors. One is the full certificate in dir format, and one is the subject public key info in dir format or a raw public key. There's nothing else.
I wanted to say there was more than one. I'm sure Victor will chime in and give us the exact list off the top of his head, but yep, there he is.
Are there 3, really?
Victor, why don't you answer the question since I'm blanking on it in front of a room?
Indeed, there are only there are only two selectors. It's the public key and the full binary blob. The binary blob, I guess, is defined to be dir, but really I don't think it was necessarily the case that it must be dir. It's just the full certificate in whatever form it appears in. So we could make that clearer or define a new selector. Is CBOR supported in TLS? You see the TLSA record is TLS specific. If CBOR is outside TLS, then the whole question is kind of moot, right? Because it's no longer TLSA. So I've never seen TLS use CBOR encoded certs. So I don't know what we're talking about exactly.
I mean, so I think, Victor, your point is perfect, right? If you're doing the whole blob or even just the key, then it doesn't matter because we're taking it at its word, right? We don't actually specify what the encoding of the blob is. Rick.
Rick van Rijn. I'm so eager about client certificate recognition that I already have it implemented in a TLS daemon where I go all the way looking up SFE record, ensuring DNSSEC, looking up an LDAP server, parsing what's in there, and so on and so on. I'm really eager to rip that out because nobody's using it, and I would very much like to have something as simple and elegant as this.
Excellent. Okay. Any other comments on that? I think we probably have time for one more question then. So my next question is going to be, I am planning on deploying Dance. So we need operators, right? We need people that actually, you own a DNS zone, you own something or other where you can actually make use of Dance technology. I don't care if it's a gigantic infrastructure and you own a company that's going to deploy millions of IoT devices, or if you're just going to use it, you know, in your small operational network. I guess in this case, do not raise hand could mean I plan to never deploy Dance. That might be the way to think about it. Note that you can unclick and you can, you know, choose to do nothing as well, which is meaning you're not sure yet. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. As I said in the last BOF I just drilled, we don't actually attract operators here much. You know, the IETF is not an operator convention, so having any is actually somewhat of a good sign. If anybody wants to stand or raise hands to speak to how they are planning on using it, aside from, we've seen some, you know, presentations in the past. Anybody that hasn't spoken yet that wants to give a quick description, we'd love to hear it. All right, with no hands, I think we are near end of time, so I'm going to give Joey the microphone so she can close us out.
Well, I guess we can just close for now with yet another reminder to try and keep the, oh, we have somebody here. All right.
You need to ask if there's participants that want to discuss something.
Well, what topics do you think we should be discussing at the interim, and are there other people that feel the same way?
To put it another way, the chairs are always happy to hold meetings. That's never a problem.
Michael Richardson at the microphone. So I think the short of it is that we need to have deadlines earlier than March, and virtual interims are good ways to do that. We had a lot of discussions about things about that had to go to the list and this and that, you know, usually motivates people. So what are the topics? Pretty much everything we talked about. I think that the architecture document and the other use cases, we are in working group last call for some of them. So that may be appropriate after that point to deal with whatever issues that we authors can't resolve. So I wouldn't mind seeing 2 virtual interims before the next IETF. That would be my goal. I think we would make much better progress that way.
Okay, that's good. I mean, so we are your chairs, and we will do whatever the group wants at your behest. So it sounds like probably January for an interim. And what we will do is propose that people pitch topics for they actually want to discuss, right? So we actually drug you guys, drug agenda items out for this one in probably even the last hour. So we need stuff more in advance. It's very hard to put together an agenda at the last second. So.
Yeah, I guess the very least it could be a follow up on the topic Shimon was telling us about. But yeah, just like we said, it will definitely be mostly up to you guys. All right, so then that seems to be it for today. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.